Hi everyone. So I recently listened to the Ben Milton, Mike Mearls conversation over at the Questing Beast channel, and I swear, either I have severe brain damage or everyone else does. And I know logically that means it's probably my brain that's broken, but I really don't think so, and I'm gonna make the argument here that everyone else is all fucked up. And I am specifically saying that Dungeons & Dragons has given the entire role-playing industry brain damage. See, I've got a video that's already shot but will be released later because it needs effects and editing. And it's all about how, based on how people talk about RPGs, I have no idea how to talk to you all about RPGs. That's that other video, but there's probably going to be some overlap with this one, so just FYI for when that comes out. So the entire Milton Mearls conversation, from game design to comparisons to Magic or to board games, doesn't have a goddamn thing to do with RPGs. It's all about public appeal and customer satisfaction and market share. And I get it. I get it as much as anyone in the history of this industry that you know sell books, your life goes shit. I'm always on the edge of disaster, and I know I'm shit at marketing and public appeal, and I've really let that go even more than ever before, to my great detriment. But part of the reason for that, a big reason for that, is that the entire frame of the conversation around RPGs is so far away from my understanding of what RPGs are and why I do this at all, that I feel like I might as well just dance in front of the camera and make Teletubby noises, and that'll have just as much impact, as writing something passionate and or clever about the state of things or what LOTFB is doing. So this Milton Mearls thing, which is as high visibility a conversation you're ever going to have with people who have influence and respect in this industry, they spend almost no time talking about why you would want to play Dungeons & Dragons, what the player experience is in service of. Basically, the question is, what the fuck are you doing when you're playing Dungeons & Dragons? And if you're going to make Magic or board game comparisons, you have to say why that's relevant. What the fuck are you doing when you're playing Magic? What the fuck are you doing when you're playing a board game? And why is that relevant to what the fuck you're doing when you're playing, in this case, Dungeons & Dragons? And this is where I hit the wall with people. In real life, I see the eyes glaze over, the disengagement, I've got an event coming up, gotta go, sorry. But I don't think I'm so incompetent a communicator that I'm just dribbling nonsense. I think it's just a completely different frame of reference of why we're even here in the first place. So let me try another way to get at what I'm talking about. If I hold up a superhero role-playing game, and I should have brought one with me as an example, or if I tell you I'm making a superhero RPG, you immediately understand that this RPG will be modeling superhero media. But there will be many questions about what kind of superhero RPG it's gonna be. It's been almost 100 years of superheroes being popular in the culture, and how superhero stories are told has changed a lot over that time. So when I say superhero role-playing game, everyone understands that the game needs to define what kind of superhero. And it will be referencing existing superhero media to make those definitions, so you have the proper framework and mindset for what this superhero RPG is trying to model, so you know what the fuck it is you're doing when you play this particular superhero RPG. And it will be understood that the RPG will be using superhero media outside of itself as inspiration and explanation, and it will be understood that the audience should be familiar with that superhero media. But you say Dungeons & Dragons, and suddenly those sorts of questions don't seem to exist. Everyone acts like everyone knows what it means to play Dungeons & Dragons, and just, no. You have to answer the goddamn question of what sort of fantasy is this game supposed to be modeling. Because there have been thousands of years of mythology and fiction that have informed our understanding of what fantasy is. And I'll say this again, it's all distinct. There is no actual fucking thing as generic fantasy. You have to define what the fuck it is you're doing with fantasy just as much as you have to when you say superheroes. In the Shadow Dark Morkborg video, you can complain as much as you want how unprofessional I was talking about those games, and you can also fucking blow me. But I think I demonstrated quite definitively that over 50 years, Dungeons & Dragons itself doesn't represent any one sort of game or model one specific sort of fantasy. It has itself changed what it's doing over time. You can't just say Dungeons & Dragons fantasy and leave it at that. And they know it. Mearls and Milton. Mearls is talking about 3rd edition, 4th edition, 5th edition, 5.5 as if they're different things. Talks about the popularity of the Rules Cyclopedia on PDF and how that's a different thing. So they fucking know and understand that different versions of D&D have all sorts of different assumptions built into them, but when they talk about D&D generally, they pretend like there's a general D&D to actually talk about. I feel like I am going crazy listening to this discussion where they keep saying things that disprove their assumptions, but just go on acting like their assumptions are all simply understood fact. So when you gloss over what is this game supposed to be in favor of how do we make it appeal to more people, I don't know what the fuck you're talking about. You're skipping over the main part. Mearls at one point talks about one failure of D&D is that people keep, quote, trying to take the core and yank it in a direction rather than saying the core should stay the core and we can put stuff around it, unquote. So what's the core, Mike? Why don't you tell us what the core is supposed to be, Mike? Why don't you ask that question, Ben? If it's so obvious what the core is supposed to be that we don't have to actually say what it is, why is D&D fractioned into 100 different D&D-ish games? What sort of fantasy is D&D designed to model isn't even on the table as something to think about. Or if we're talking Hasbro and they need to make something as widely appealing as possible, what sort of fantasy would appeal to the most people and how can we make D&D model that? That question's not on the table either. There's no there. It's a gigantic conceptual black hole. So Mearls talks about how there's a growing distance between the people in charge of D&D and the D&D player base and how that's a problem. Absolutely no talk about the distance between the people in charge of D&D and whatever sort of fantasy D&D is supposed to be helping you experience, and I think that distance would be worse. Do note that whenever Mearls talks about D&D as a game and as an experience, it's all in terms of character abilities and powers and features and the rules involved and how the character is defined. Like the point of D&D is being able to play an awesome hammer guy, an awesome archer guy, that's the experience that defines D&D. Sort of like how he was talking about the ability to use dinosaurs and magic to find his experience there. Or there's the one instance of complaining that 5.5 doesn't give you the math to make your own monsters. Am I really so insane to think this way of talking about a game is loaded with so many specific assumptions, but it's just being presented as if it's the universal way to talk about games? It's not my understanding of games that's broken, it's how these people talk about them. Here's a Mearls quote. The act of playing 5e was much more the act of playing a role-playing game, just a general role-playing game. The act of playing 5.5 is the act of playing 5.5, a lot more like 3.5 or 4th edition. You're spending a lot of time manipulating the system and thinking about the system, interacting with the rules, rather than interacting with the person across the table, being immersed in this story and what's going to happen, and things that flow from that narrative rather than flowing from the rules, unquote. I'm sorry, what? What exactly is a general role-playing game? At what point is a game too technical and focused on the rules, and is this a universal standard? Are stories and narratives so generic and universal that you can make these sorts of proclamations about concentrating on the stories versus the rules without ever actually talking about what stories or what narratives? Are we just back to complaining about role-playing, R-O-L-E, versus role-playing, R-O-L-L? I mean, fuck me. This is like the highest level of the industry, and this is the level of the discourse. Fuck. And then, There's the bit where Mearls is talking about how publishers have a real fear of the audience, which keeps them reactive instead of proactive, like that's a problem. But then immediately justifying that by talking about some of the missteps the D&D team has made, like with Spelljammer, without ever saying what that misstep was. Then complaining that if lore and story is radioactive because any declarations will alienate some portion of the audience, then you have to concentrate on system. Well, there you go. If that's the thinking, wanting an awesome hammer guy who doesn't have to be a farmer who pushes people away is still talking system. Questions like, what do you do mechanically with D&D are, System is the least important part of an RPG. You figure out what do you want the game to be, what do you want the experience to have, and yes, I see you. Hello, I'm recording for YouTube. You wave hi and then please just step.
Hi.
Yes, yeah. These kids are fucking begging to be molested. Jesus fucking Christ. Anyway. But to me, going on about wanting an awesome hammer guy who doesn't have to be a farmer who pushes people away is still talking system. I mean, questions like, what would you do mechanically with D&D are... Okay, I'm repeating a bit, fucking kids. System is the least important part of an RPG, because what you need to do is figure out what you want the game to be, what you want the game, what experience you want people to have, what is the game for, and then the system and player interface are downstream of that. So the system's not the important part of a game. So when you have a question of what would you do mechanically with D&D, and you tell someone start with the monster manual as an answer, how about figure out exactly what you're doing first, state all of your assumptions like they shouldn't be assumptions. Like when he's talking about his new project, I'm building the D&D I want to play, talking about making the game resident and grounded in immersion and dialing back rules density. And it's like, immersed in what, Mike? Not a bad question, Bert. I mean, Dungeons & Dragons was originally built around Conan or Fafhrd and Grey Mouser style adventures, taking little bits and bobs from all sorts of fantasy authors like Paul Anderson, Jack Vance, Michael Moorcock, etc. The circle that D&D was made by and for were avid fantasy readers, and they all knew their stuff. D&D escaped beyond that circle and met an audience with a different set of assumptions about what fantasy is, with Tolkien being the standard for what fantasy is in the public's mind. The first decade of D&D is this fantastic tension between the intended pulp adventuring and Tolkien-esque heroic quests. That D&D could hold up doing Tolkien-esque quests was a happy accident, but it held up so well that no other fantasy game even sniffed D&D's shorts in terms of popularity until Pathfinder, which was just D&D. The heroic quest model won out, and then in the 21st century the game became all about the character build. And D&D stopped looking outside itself for inspiration or something to model, aside from player vanity, I guess. And to me, that's when it went all to shit. 25 full years now, D&D going to shit. Lamentations of the Flame Princess models horror movies and fiction, using underground heavy metal as an attitude guide and early D&D adventure model as the framework with which to deliver it all. Deathfrost Doom was the Evil Dead meets Night of the Living Dead. Romero and Raimi were thanked right there on the back cover. I threw in little bits like ripping off Crazy Ralph from Friday the 13th and using an idea from a Merciful Fate song, The Old Oak Hanging Tree. We knew exactly what we wanted to be from day one. We wear our influences on our sleeves here, and it's not just flavor or set dressing, it's the experience we're trying to give to all of you. That it doesn't conform to what D&D is supposed to be, well, I defy you to tell me what D&D is supposed to be these days beyond the rules. What is D&D trying to model in its gameplay nowadays? You can't fucking say, and worst of all, neither can they. And it occurs to me that a lot of what people don't like about LOTFP, the weirdness, the disturbing content, the disinterest in generic fantasy, is to me the very point of LOTFP. See, I don't like role-playing games. I don't like role-playing games. You saying that you like role-playing games makes as much sense to me as saying, I like books. I like movies. I like music. It's like, okay, what kind? I like certain types of stories and atmospheres. So then I'll like RPGs that model those kind of stories and atmospheres in ways that let me do my own thing with them. That's what I'm in this for. That's all I'm in this for. What the hell are the rest of you doing? What the hell are you talking about? I mean, that's a genuine question. I mean, I have no idea. And it really looks to me like you don't either.